Welcome to Shauns Take, brought to you by the Keystone Sports Network. Here are your hosts, Shaun and Jim.
Hello and welcome to Shauns Take, brought to you by the Keystone Sports Network. I'm Jim Galante. He is Sean Gold. Sean, last week we had our pre-NFL draft special. This week it's the post-NFL draft special. And I'll tell you what, we talked last week about it being like a holiday, and it really is. But the other thing I'd like to point out is how much fun it is that they took the NFL draft out of the indoor New York facility, got it out throughout the country. This year it was Green Bay. What a great show.
I love it. I'm glad they're doing it because it is something that, all different fan bases should get to experience. And we definitely saw that in Green Bay. Their fans were excited. You see other fans traveling in for it. I do like it being a much more public event than it was in the past.
It is. And the pride that each city takes in it, it's like they always want to outdo the previous hosts of it. A fantastic show. Good for Green Bay. Good for the NFL. Whoever came up with this idea, they deserve a raise, Sean. All right, let's move on, though, to our review of the draft. And there's nowhere else to start with except for Shedeur Sanders. This was a guy who at one point was thought about as a possible number one overall pick. Then the question became, would he be taken second or third? Eventually, it seemed like the consensus was he might drop down to number 9 and the Saints. Well, guess what? He dropped and he dropped and he kept dropping. I know you're a Colorado guy. What did you think as this was all going on?
This was insane. And for it's almost unfortunate that this had to be the story of the draft because he should have been picked, second, third, ninth, 21st or second to the Steelers. And that was the end of the Shedeur Sanders coverage. Instead, it goes on till round 5, which was baffling to me. And I think, the overarching theme was the NFL owners had something going on. I think one day there's going to be a bigger story about it. And we know, is it how his interviews were? Is it that maybe his arm's not as strong? Is it that people didn't like him in person? There's all these things coming out. But my thought on that was, you can say, hey, we don't like his character. He went into interviews and he said, don't draft me if you're not ready to change your franchise and build a winning culture, which to me, I do like my quarterback to be a winner. So if my quarterback tells me, hey, I'm going to come in and win you football games, that's not a negative in my book. But maybe it was for some of these NFL GMs meeting with him when he said that confidence in the meeting that I'm going to change your culture. And if you don't want a culture change and you've had losing ways, don't draft it. Maybe it offended some people. And I get that. But at the same time, do you want your quarterback going into a meeting saying, I kind of plan on being pretty average for you? Like, I'm going to be an average quarterback. No, you want that confidence. So he had that, and I think it rubbed some people the wrong way. Understandable on that, but the talent there was every NFL analyst had him as the second or third best quarterback and a top 20 overall prospect. So the fact that he went all the way to the 5th round, there was something else going on. The Deion Sanders image over him, I think, had an effect here. I do fully believe if he put up the same numbers and his last name wasn't Sanders, he would have been the second quarterback taken in this draft. So I think there was NFL owners maybe feeling pressure that Deion may jump ship to the NFL eventually and start calling more of the shots, which owners we know don't like to give up that control. There was something else going on there. And I think one day it'll all come out. But in the end, he's a Cleveland Brown, and I think he's ready to go work for a starting quarterback job that is kind of wide open heading into this season.
Sean, I guess my take's a little bit different on it. I do think the quarterback position is unique throughout all of sports. Within football itself, you could have, say, a wide receiver or a cornerback who's a prima donna. Yeah, think Deion, okay? And that's okay. But the quarterback, this guy's the face of the franchise. This is the forward-facing player, and it's much different. And you talk about, yes, you'd rather have a guy who's confident than, gee, I'm not sure if I could do the job. Well, there's also a difference between confidence and arrogance and indifference, as the word starts leaking out about what his interviews were like at the combine. And also, I don't think this was a guy who was this consensus number one quarterback. Hey, it doesn't matter what he does, he's the number one guy, physically, talent wise. I think there was some questions of was he really a first round guy? Maybe it was just the shortage of quarterbacks in this year's class. Maybe he could have been a second round type talent or third. The problem is, in his mind, he was the number one pick. That's the talent he had. And are you really going to deal with that? Do you want to deal with that if you're an NFL franchise? The other part of it that I didn't think much about, but as he started to fall down the draft, he could have been at a position where, hey, he's coming in as a backup quarterback. And the thought is this really the guy you want? Does he have the attitude to be a backup quarterback and have to work his way up to get an opportunity? Would he be willing to do that, or would he create controversy? NFL owners don't like controversy. I was not surprised seeing him drop.
I do completely agree with that. I think I think the logical teams were, well, the Browns could have considered at number 5 if they really wanted a quarterback, taking him there. And good decision by the Cleveland Browns to take him in round 5 instead of pick 5 after they traded back there. That's great value for them. And then you see the Saints at 9 and the Steelers 21 or 22. Those were kind of the spots where it made sense. And then after that, when you could tell these teams weren't going to take a quarterback or take a different quarterback, he isn't a guy that you want to go into a situation where, hey, you're not going to be a starter for the next 4 years, because he's a big personality. And it's almost like Cam Newton at the end of his career. Were you going to bring in Cam Newton to be a backup quarterback? No. And it's not that he was a bad guy, but he's just too much of a star to have as a number 2 on a team. And that's the same type of thing with Shedeur. And now Shedeur hasn't proven himself in the NFL like Cam Newton did, but I completely understand it that a guy with that much just media hype around him, it is a distraction if he's locked in at your number 2 quarterback position behind a vet who is not a bridge quarterback. Like, would it have made sense for Seattle to go take him after signing Sam Darnold to a 4-year deal? No, because then he's kind of breathing down his neck the whole time, and you can't let the Sam Darnold experiment, or not experiment, because we know what Sam Darnold can do, play out. And there's always this pressure there. So I think in the end, Cleveland was actually one of the best situations he could have gone into for everything that happened. And the other thing I want to touch on this, as you mentioned, he went into this process kind of thinking, I'm either the number 1 or number 2 pick. I think there was some bad advice given to him there. I don't think he would have been a 5th round pick if he threw at the NFL Combine, if he tested at the Combine. He had a pro day, he had a good pro day and everything, but Colorado's pro day, let's be honest, was kind of a media parade. Everyone was just there for the hype. Travis Hunter, Shedeur, we got the stars out. I think he should have gone and thrown at the NFL Combine and said, watch me against every other quarterback besides Cam Ward, who we knew was going to be the number 1 pick. Watch me versus Jackson Dart. Watch me versus Tyler Shaw versus Jalen Milroe. Watch how much better I am than them. Instead of saying, I'm already locked into this position, and Jackson Dart went out, had a great combine, and the Giants ended up trading back into the 1st round for him. That could have been Shedeur, I think, if he performed at the combine. So I think that was a little bit of a mistake there, and just kind of poor decision-making on his team's part to tell him, this was not a Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels situation like last year, where there were 2 guys clearly above the rest that were going 1 and 2 to quarterback needy teams. We knew Cam Ward was going to the Titans for a while. We didn't know that Shedeur was going to slide this much, but with that, he was going to be a lock when you had Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter as the next 2 best prospects in the draft here, probably the 2 best overall prospects in the draft. So I think some mismanagement, leading up to this, that all played a role in it as well. So with that, enough with that topic here. We've covered it, and I know listeners have heard a lot about it. What I would like to move on to is, Jim, who are some of your under the radar guys that got drafted, maybe in the 1st round, maybe later rounds, that you just saw the pick and said, that's an incredible value pick right there?
Well, I'll tell you what, we did this last week before the draft, so this isn't just in hindsight. And I believe you put out a couple names. Me, I couldn't help it. I put out 5 names, 5 players that I saw play against Penn State, who I follow and watch every game. And I thought there were a couple interesting among my group. Donovan Jackson, who was the offensive lineman from Ohio State, who really impressed me. Guess what? He went first round to the Vikings. So apparently, at least to him, to the Vikings, not so much under the radar. The other one, I mentioned Jackson Dart because I saw him in the bowl game against Penn State a year ago. Jackson Dart was really impressive. I thought he showed really well. Guess what? The Giants traded up into the first round. Now, they weren't using him in that, early number 3 pick. They traded up to the number 25 position to get Jackson Dart. I think at least the Giants agreed with me. I'm not sure having the Giants agree with me is an endorsement or not, but I think that was impressive. My other guys, Trey Harris, who was the wide receiver from Ole Miss, who also equally impressed me like Jackson Dart, he went in the second round to the Chargers. I think a pretty good place for him. The next two, Harold Fannin, the tight end from Bowling Green, and KJ Winston, the safety from Penn State. I actually kind of was hopeful that maybe at the end of the second round, my Eagles would pick one of those two. They ended up picking another safety, and they didn't go for the tight end. Fannin went to the Browns, just like Shador, and he went there. I think that was the early third round. So I thought my under the radar guys did pretty well overall. Of course, the real answer will come in a couple years when we see what kind of career these guys had. How about your under the radar guys, Shaun?
Yeah, well, so Jackson Hawes gets drafted to the Bills. Super, super excited for him. I think it's a good landing spot there. We know Buffalo has produced tight ends before, and they have Dalton Kincaid, who's their pass catching guy. But one thing about Jackson is he can run block, and he is not afraid to get his hands dirty and move defensive linemen and linebackers. And I think in an offense where we saw last year, the Bills at times want to go very run heavy with Josh Allen leading the way, with James Cook leading the way. Having a tight end who can get in there and help move a pile is something great. So I think it's a phenomenal landing spot for him. And then I wanted to bring up a couple other names today as well, who I thought teams got very good value on. I'm going to start with a running back. This was a huge running back class. And I think one of the big questions was, why in the world did the Dallas Cowboys not take a running back in the first round, the second round, the third round, when that was their biggest need heading into the draft? Well, they took Jaden Blue, running back out of Texas, in the 5th round. Not a guy who produced a ton in college, had good moments, but wasn't Ashton Genty type of season or anything. But he ran a 4.38. He's a big play back. And like I said, the numbers and the stats aren't going to jump off the page, which is why he was available in the 5th round. But there's a wide open depth chart in Dallas at the running back position. And I would not be surprised if he ends up having a pretty good year as a rookie in Dallas. So I think that was a good value pick. I think he's a guy who has that breakaway speed they love to see in the NFL, but is also built enough to be able to carry the ball between the tackles. I think that's going to end up being a very good pick. And then I want to highlight the Raiders. Amazing pick getting Ashton Genty with the 6th overall pick. He's what Vegas needs. He's a guy the fan base is going to just absolutely love and adore. Now, you helped Geno Smith with that pick. You already have Brock Bowers there. I like that the Raiders went receiver heavy in this draft. Jack Betch, TCU in the 2nd round, and then Dante Thornton Jr. from Tennessee in the 4th round. 2 receivers. Beck had 1,000 yards last year. Thornton ran a 4.3 flat. If one of those guys ends up making an impact in year 1, that's a big win for the Raiders, because really, you've got Ashton Genty, who's going to get over 100 carries and is probably the front runner to win Rookie of the Year. And then you've got Brock Bowers, who just set the single season rookie reception record. We know he's a star. Jacoby Myers is a good kind of wide receiver too. If one of these guys can step up, all of a sudden Vegas has a pretty complete offense there with Geno Smith and Pete Carroll in year 1. So I really liked that they, double dipped in the receiver market. And if one of them hits, I think it's a huge success for them here. If one of them can be, a 5-7 year starter for the Raiders, that's a massive win, getting one of those guys in the 2nd or 4th round. And I'm going to give you one more name, going a little heavy here, an undrafted free agent signing. Easton Mascarenas, linebacker out of USC. I played with him in high school, and you can tell in our team, there were a couple people that were destined to make it to the NFL, and he was the top of that list. As a sophomore, junior, senior, he was probably the best player on our team every single year. And you could just tell he was different. Went to Oregon State, transferred to USC this past year, ended up being their starting Mike linebacker, called the defense there, ran a 4.5 at his pro day, went undrafted, got picked up by the Browns. I would not be surprised at all if he makes their day one roster and at a minimum gets special team snaps this year, but eventually becomes their starting Mike linebacker there at USC. So all right, Cleveland. I really liked that signing for him. Congratulations to Easton. And he's definitely going to be a name that I think will one day be pretty well known in the NFL.
Those are very good picks. And that's the interesting thing, Shaun, with the NFL and the NFL draft. They say no matter where you are, where you come from, they'll find you. And they probably will. And you do get these undrafted free agents who will make the team. They just never were given that opportunity, perhaps, to make their mark in college. They either played at the small school or they had a small role with the bigger schools. But the NFL, they'll at least find you to give you that opportunity. If you have one outstanding feature, you mentioned Thornton, who is a big receiver running a 4.3. Now, he moved around schools. I think he was at Oregon for a while, ended up at Tennessee. Wasn't a guy who put up the numbers, but hey, he has that physical trait. He's this big, could run this fast. You know what? He's going to get a chance. That's the way it works in the NFL. If you have an outstanding trait, you'll be given the opportunity, Shaun.
Definitely. And it's funny. We see it kind of in the NBA as well. You see a guy average 15 points in college, go on to average 28 points in the NBA. It's just and a lot of these receivers too, like Thornton, had a role with Tennessee, but he wasn't getting T-Mac numbers who, just blew up at Arizona. He may do better in the NFL than he did in college because he's now found his athleticism there, and he's going to get into a system where they want him to succeed. And don't be surprised if a lot of these guys end up putting up a lot more numbers, especially running backs, in the NFL than they did in college. It's kind of funny how that worked. Now, let's segment back to arguably the most important position to hit in a draft, and that's the quarterbacks. We had Cam Ward go number one. We talked about Jackson Dart. We've talked about Shedeur Sanders. Who else in this draft do you think ended up in a good spot where they may be able, maybe not year one or year two, but may be able to make a pretty successful NFL career for themselves?
I actually think there's several names here to hit on, Shaun. And if you remember, I don't know if it was in last week's preview show or prior to that when we've talked quarterbacks, and I mentioned, I gave you the option. Who would break out? Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, or take the field? You took Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. I took the field because I think there's a lot of possibilities. I think Jackson Dart, who we talked about, the Giants moving up to get him. And I also, it's time to reiterate something an NFL kind of guy told me this. If there's a quarterback out there, if you like them, you can't worry about what everybody else thinks. So Jackson Dart, the Giants took him higher than what the consensus was. I think also Tyler Shaw to the Saints. Remember, we were talking about them going for Shedeur Sanders in round one, number 9. They took him in round 2, fairly high. I think Jalen Milroe with Seattle, he's got a chance there, Shaun. He really does. Then I'm going to go down to round 6, where we saw Kyle McCord to the Eagles, Will Howard to the Steelers, and even Riley Leonard to the Colts. These are picks that seem like they're those throwaway picks late. Don't be surprised. Eagles, kind of a quarterback factory, Howie Roseman says. Kyle McCord may not end up a starter on the Eagles, but he may develop into something. And I'll tell you what, I just have this strange feeling Will Howard, maybe not right away, but at some point will end up being the starter with the Steelers. And I think that's a good organization for him.
I'm glad you brought up these 6th round guys because I was going to mention all the names that you brought up. I think good landing spots for guys. But I did get excited with Kyle McCord and Will Howard. And like you said, Kyle McCord, there's no path for him being a starter anytime soon in Philadelphia, but man, that's a guy who can sling it. We know he's got an arm on him, and he was lighting it up at Syracuse in his final season. He may be the backup right away. I wouldn't be surprised if he wins that QB2 job for the Eagles, which would be pretty impressive this year. And then, blowout games, he's going to get some time and everything, and he may make a little bit of a name for himself. And some other teams, come a couple years from now, may say, hey, you know what? We got to open quarterback competition. Why don't you come over here and compete for a starting job? And then Will Howard, like you said, would not be shocked. We don't know what the Steelers are still doing at quarterback. Is Aaron Rodgers coming or not? No idea. Don't really care because he's not the answer for them. I would not be shocked to see Will Howard start some games this year in Pittsburgh. He's a mature quarterback. He's had the experience, just won a national championship game. I think he can make the reads, and he might not be the most wow factor quarterback in this draft, which, of course, why he went in round 6 instead of round 1 or 2. But I do think in the right system, he can play well, and Pittsburgh's a team where, they're going to have open quarterback competitions. And I would not be shocked if week 10, week 11, week 12, if things aren't going well with whoever is their starter at the time, to see Will Howard get a shot.
Same here. And I'm going to throw out 2 more names very late in the draft. Curtis Rourke went to the 49ers. Guy going late to the 49ers at quarterback. I feel like I've seen this story before, Shaun. So could something happen there? The other one, Quinn Ewers to Miami. Remember, Quinn Ewers was all-world coming out of high school. Things just never quite came together for him in his collegiate career. He was nicked up a bit, still got out there and played, handled himself, I thought, pretty well at Texas. You know what? He's going to be behind a guy who's very, very injury prone in Miami. Who knows? We might see a bit of Quinn Ewers there with the Dolphins. All right, finally, Shaun, just one last, how about putting a bow on this draft for me? What are your final takeaways from it?
I actually want to make a final takeaway on Quinn Ewers, who you just mentioned, because 7th round pick, I'm sure he's very happy to be in the NFL. I think he's in a great situation in Miami as well. I've seen a lot of people say he may run that system better than Tua does, which I'm not sure I'm there yet, but I think it's a good landing spot. But I want to talk about NIL with this, funny enough, because Quinn Ewers reportedly turned down some very, very big money to transfer elsewhere and stay another year in college. And we're not talking $1 million or $2 million. We're talking in that $5 million type of deals. I don't know if he regrets his decision right now or not. I think it's an impossible thing. Who knows? But he's making a lot less in the NFL right now, being a 7th round pick than he would have made an extra year in college. So I wonder if in future drafts, are we going to see guys who get that, hey, we'll give you $6 million to come over, lead our program for one more year with your last year of eligibility? Are we going to see guys go to the NFL or stay in college now? The NFL has always been the dream, and I think 4 years ago, before NIL became a thing, it would have always been, this is my shot to go pro, I'm going to go do that. But now when you can make about 10 times more money staying in college than being a late round draft pick, it's interesting to see how that's going to change. And if we're going to see a lot of guys try not to just be that, I played 3 years in college, I used my eligibility, I'm on to the NFL. If we're going to see a lot more 4th year, 5th year guys in college who could have gone to the NFL a year or 2 previously.
That's a great point, Shaun. I think we've already begun to see that changeover. The last couple of years, national champion Michigan 2 years ago, many of their players came back who were NFL eligible. A year ago, national champion Ohio State Buckeyes. I believe they had 14 players in this draft. It's because many of them who could have gone to the NFL a year ago decided to stick around. And I'd be curious to see some of these guys who stick around, if we looked at their draft grades, how much they help themselves by coming back. So it's now to the point where an argument can be made. Yes, Cam Ward, He actually did make that decision a year ago to stick around another year, went to Miami, made himself lots of money. Shedeur Sanders might have wished he came back. Quinn Ewers, the end of the story isn't told there yet. However, at least short term, probably would have been better off taking the money to stick around another year of college football. No doubt
Keystone
that's going to be an
Sports
option
Network.
for players now, Shaun. And the House settlement, which should be coming soon, it means the college programs could pay players themselves directly. That's just another reason to stick around because there's guaranteed money there. All right, Shaun, that is going to be it for our show. You know what? It's been so much fun the last 2 weeks, pre-draft, post-draft. How about next week, we'll come up with a new topic. We hope you'll join us then on Shauns Take.
Keystone Sports Network.